Okay, so moving on to the bass part. So that's what we're gonna have a look at today. So I've got my drums all mixed as before. So the first thing I'm gonna do is save this as a new version. So make sure you go save as and call it, today's date or call it bass as I've done. Just so you can go back to your drums if needs be and make any tweaks to that. So I've got a new version. I've just called it bass, and I've just got my bass loaded up here. If you remember from last time, we've got it going through a bus, but there's no effects on there, there's no plugins at all. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this bass track. So I can go to duplicate at the top here, or press the Command D, and that gives me another track underneath. Now I'm going to call this bass distortion or bass dist, and we're just going to double it. So we've got bass, and then we've got this bass one or bass dist. Now, because we copied the channel, it's going through our bass bus, so we can solo that as well. So we've now got two copies identical of the bass, no plugins on there, just completely dry. The reason we've done this is this second track, this distortion one, I'm going to add a overdrive or a sort of preamp plugin just to give us a bit of a sort of overdriven sound to blend in with the clean DI. When you've just recorded through a DI, sometimes it can be a bit sterile. There's none of that amp sound on it. So we're just going to mix in by using this bit of distortion here. We don't want this to be the overall sound of the track. We don't want the whole thing to be all fuzzy. So by doing it as a blend, you can get that mix between the two quite nicely. So when we're doing like using Pro Tools, the SansAmp plugin is perfect for this. But in Logic, what I'm actually going to use is the Bass Amp Designer. So I've just put this on the double, so just on the distortion track. Now you can go through all the weird and wonderful presets here. There's some funky sounds that you have to play with, but all I want is a little bit of distortion. So to get that, I'm going to change my amp to sort of vintage like valve amp sound, just this classic one, sort of a copy of that Ampeg valve amp. And first thing I'm going to do, make sure the output is just on 0. I don't want to be adding too much gain. And I've got my blend all the way to amp because I've got my own separate DI sound, so I don't need to double it again. And what I'm going to look for with this is just a bit of a sort of slightly distorted sound. So I'm just going to solo the second bass track even. Okay. So we're looking for lots of kind of mid frequencies, quite a bit of gain. I've put it on channel 2 because it's more distorted of the two choices. Sort of left the bass and treble about halfway and just stuck a bit more mid to give a bit more of that characteristic kind of tonality from the middle. And then I've got the compressor off and I've just turned the master down, stop that clipping we were getting in on the output. And then we can blend between that and our other bass. So have a look here, I've got my two bass tracks, and I'm just going to turn this one all the way down and just bring it until we get a little bit of that overdrive sound. Stick this one up a little bit too so we can hear it a bit better. So that's my clean DI, and this is my distorted track. Without. Yeah, that's without, and then with. So it's just adding a little bit of that kind of gritty mid sounds that you really want coming out of the bass. Lots of the bass kind of sound is actually focused around the mids and the low mids rather than the sort of real extreme bass or treble sounds. We just want to really emphasize that with this distortion track. I haven't used much at all. My fader's right down the bottom. It's just for a little bit of colour on this track. And then if we move across to the bass bus here, so our group, I am going to pop in a compressor and a EQ. So let's stick a compressor on here. And for this, I'm going to use the, let's use the classic VCA. So this is sort of your 1176 copy. So as for all compressors in Logic, turn auto gain off. And then I'm going to stick the ratio onto a 4:1, which is sort of reminiscent of your classic 1176 sort of minimum setting. And I'm going to roll the threshold back until I'm getting somewhere between sort of around that 5-6 dB reduction. I want it to be quite heavily compressed. And then I can make up with the makeup gain. And then just compare off and on. It's just a bit more consistent, that's what we're looking for. Just want to even out those sort of those notes, everything's around the same playing level without too many sort of notes poking through or things getting lost. And then finally, with this EQ, what I'm going to do, I'm going to first of all roll off any of the real lows, so anything up to about 30-40 hertz. We don't need that in this track. It's not a heavy sub bass track, you can't hear it anyway, it's just muds. By getting rid of that on all of your kind of instruments, you're just clearing up a room to add more volume to the main mix. I suggest getting rid of up to about 100 hertz on anything that isn't a bass instrument, and then at least sort of 30 hertz on anything that is. Compare. If anything, by getting rid of that real sub, you're actually getting more low ends because you're more defining this region rather than all the unnecessary energy that's going on down here that we can't hear anyway. I'm going to give a bit of a boost around that sort of 60-70 mark just to get a bit more of the sort of fundamental of the sounds. And then I'm going to cut sort of in this mid region. Here around there's a bit of a ring. So you often find that around the sort of 300, 350 to 5, even 700 mark, you might need to do a bit of a scoop down just to get rid of that kind of cluttered sound there. It's a bit more defined, and then we're going to give it a bit of an attack up the top end around the sort of 2 to 2.5. A bit narrower. Sort of for that string attack sound, and then again I might give it a little bit of a boost around the sort of 1k just to add some bite and attack to it. The final thing I've done on the EQ is just roll off with a low pass filter, everything up to about 5k. There's nothing above that. Again, it's just clearing space in the mix. So all of these are quite subtle. Here we've got a bit of a boost going down in the low end to give it a bit more oomph. We're cutting this sort of muddy area around sort of 3 to 5, and then a bit of a boost around the 1k and 2 to 2.5k to add some attack. And then hear it with the drums, hear it with the kick.